based purely on vibes. The Brits, that's a fall book. There's something that just feels cozy, you know? The truth is, I have no idea what season most of these books are set in. Hey everyone, I'm excited for today's video because I'm talking about my fall book recommendations. The weather will continue to be an ungodly temperature, but it's fall because it's September. I don't make the rules, so I will be wearing sweaters. I'm already wearing a sweater and drinking hot coffee with autumnal spices, regardless of the temperature. So 'tis the season. I'm going to be talking about the books that I recommend for fall to get those like cozy fall vibes, you know. I am not going to though be doing like horror recommendations or like spooky Halloween recommendations. That's another video. We're going to be doing purely just like fall, autumnal. The truth is, I have no idea what season most of these books are set in. I don't remember, and I will try to justify to you why these are fall books, but the truth is it's based purely on vibes. Folks, I am editing this and I've just got to pop in to say I know about the collar on my sweater. It's bad, and I would tell you to ignore it. I know it's hard, but I'm not re-recording that part, so I know, and I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry. If you read one of these and you're like, Ashley, this takes place in the middle of summer, I don't know what to tell you. In my recollection of when I read the book, I'm like, that's a fall book. So I tried to do ones that were a little bit deep cuts of like, if you're wanting to try something new, something beyond those kind of more like the first books that you might think of when you think of fall reads. So let's get started. So the first book I'm going to be talking about today is Brood by Jackie Polzin. This is a book I haven't really heard anyone talk about. So any chance I get to recommend it, I do, because I think it's great and more people should read it. And listen, it's about this woman who is raising chickens. I know that doesn't initially sound necessarily very exciting, but stick with me. She's kind of going through, I guess, a midlife crisis, our narrator, but it feels so intimate and muted. And when I say muted, I don't mean that in a bad way. Like, if it had a color palette, it would be muted, which is why I think it reminds me of fall. Like, it feels like very intimate, very cozy, very warm to me. It really is just kind of an internal monologue of this woman trying to figure out how to raise these chickens. And it talks about friendship and it talks about marriage, and it does these things in really like subtle ways. It's one of those where you can really read between the lines if you want. I think that there's a lot to be said about relationship and sexuality and just going about day-to-day life in general. But I also think it's a really interesting, just even if you don't kind of read between the lines, it's a really interesting look at a woman who is just trying to raise chickens when she doesn't have a lot of experience doing so. I highly recommend it. It's a short read. It's like a small book. It's relatively short, so I recommend giving it a shot. I think it's great. I think it's so good. And I think it's a great fall read. Again, it just feels very cozy to me. The next book I'm going to talk about is Utopia Avenue by David Mitchell. This was one that I picked up purely for the cover because look at the cover. I have trouble describing my feelings for this book because it certainly wasn't like a favorite of last year when I read it. And it was a long read. Actually, technically, I didn't finish it until the beginning of this year, but I had started it in 2021. It took me a long time to read it. I do think it's too long. I'm not selling this well, but I think I really ended up enjoying it. It is one that left an impression on me. It's about the formation of a British band in the 60s. 67. If you liked Bohemian Rhapsody, kind of the story of watching this band kind of form and grow in popularity, very similar. It doesn't feel like a ripoff of Bohemian Rhapsody, but it's a very similar story. To tell you why I think it's fall. Well, one, it's British, and I think when I think of like the Brits, I think it's just overcast and raining, which feels like fall to me. Do you know what I mean? I know it does sometimes get sunny in Britain, but I think that if we had to attribute a season, it would be fall. There's something that just feels cozy, you know, when I'm thinking about being in a pub in London. Do you know what I mean? It's also, like I said, a longer read, which I personally think it could have been shorter, but it is one that I think is a great kind of cozying up with a cup of tea, hunkering down. We're reading this kind of a monster of a book. I say monster, it's less than 600 pages. I think it gives a really good look into each of these characters as each of the members of the band as individuals and how they interact with the people in their own lives, and also how they interact with each other, which I think is another thing that kind of, I don't know, I think these super introspective, intimate books feel like fall to me, just tonally. Again, I'm not going to try to justify it too much to you. I'm just saying it feels like fall to me. Moving on, I am going to recommend Supper Club by Laura Williams. This is about a group of women who form a supper club. They gather, this group, and they just eat an absurd amount of food, like as much as they want and then more. And the point of these supper clubs and the point of the book in general is to examine and question the often treacherous relationship that women have with food, in that we are kind of told, whether directly or indirectly, how much we should be eating and criticized for how much or little we are eating. And not only that, but also a major part of it was they wanted to feel empowered to physically take up space. So like gaining weight from the food, they are then taking up more physical space. So it's one, taking up this kind of metaphorical space of not caring what people think about how much they eat, and two, commentary on the physical space that they're taking up. Really, really interesting. And I think it feels very dark tonally, which feels very fall to me. And they're kind of they break in to like different restaurants and different spaces to have these supper clubs. So it's not a thriller by any means, but it does have that kind of like sense of sneaking around in the dark, in the shadows, which feels very fall to me. So I really recommend it. It's really interesting, and the concepts of like the ideas presented in the books have really stuck with me. Really enjoyed it. Next, I'm cheating a little bit with this one, and because it is a horror, and I know we said we weren't going to do horror, but I'm talking about Misery by Stephen King. The reason why I'm choosing to include it, despite it, yes, being a horror, is because it doesn't feel as much like the spooky Halloween horror to me. I think maybe in my head, I just like some sort of like supernatural like outside element to my Halloween reads, whereas this is all, there's not any supernatural element happening with Misery. It's about this writer who, prior to the start of the book, was in a really bad car accident, and he finds himself in the home of his number one fan. It turns into this woman holding him captive, right? At first, it's under the guise of, oh, I'm taking care of you. I'm a nurse. I'm helping you through this accident, but really she's kidnapped him, right? It doesn't have an outside, like, supernatural element. It's just a person doing a really horrible thing. So to me, maybe to some people, that still fits within the guise of Halloween. For me, it's still a horror, but it's not spooky October, right? It feels like fall still. I think that this idea of him being trapped in this house and this kind of claustrophobic setting feels like left of cozy, if that makes sense. It's not cozy because it's not comforting, but this idea of him being confined in this space with one person feels like we're starting to kind of hunker down for the winter, if that makes sense. So I really recommend Misery, maybe as like at the end of September leading into our horror spooky season of October. Could be a good transition, you know, like a nice transition sweater. Misery can be the transition sweater of your reading. So while I'm still cheating, I wanted to also include The Devil All the Time by Donald Ray Pollock. This is another one that I think is technically considered a horror and has many like horror elements to it. However, again, it doesn't really have supernatural, like spooky elements to it. In The Devil All the Time, it follows multiple different storylines from multiple different characters that span over different generations, and a lot of these people are either like related, like literally related by family, or know each other in some way. All of the characters are interconnected with each other in some way, though the plot lines are all somewhat separate. So you're following these plot lines. To be honest with you, I read this a year ago. Absolutely couldn't lay them out for you right now. I don't remember. But most of it has to do with how people deal with loss and how people deal with religion and like the really toxic parts of religion and how that can affect someone negatively. And then there are some like murder is involved, right? Some crime ensues for sure throughout this, which I think kind of gives it that more horror element. Like it's not just like an introspective look on toxic religion, like definitely it is taken to the extreme, but it has this kind of ominous small rural town feeling to it, which I think is something great to dive into in the fall with a candle lit, a cup of hot cocoa, reading about murder. What more could you want? So those are the five books that I'm recommending to you for the fall. Please let me know your fall recommendations down below. I'm very excited to get into some more fall reads and hopefully have some cozy nights with a sweater, a blanket, a pumpkin candle burning. I actually don't like pumpkin candles usually that much. I don't know what it is. I want to, but every time, if it's like an actual pumpkin smelling candle, the pumpkin spices in a candle, I can really get behind. I don't know what it is. There's something off. I can't do it. But anyway, let's have a wonderful start to the fall, and I will see you next time, hopefully when it's colder. It won't be colder, but a girl can dream.